The great hall of Zarian Prime buzzed with the familiar sounds of diplomatic chatter. 12 different species had gathered for their monthly meeting, strange forms creating a colorful display under the bright lights. Some looked like walking crystals. Others resembled giant lizards. A few were nothing more than floating clouds of gas. Ambassador Kethfer adjusted his 4 eyes as he prepared to address the assembly. His blue skin rippled with amusement. As he activated the large screen at the front of the hall, "My fellow delegates," he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "I present our monthly entertainment." The screen flickered to life, showing a small blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. Earth looked peaceful from this distance, its white clouds swirling over green and brown continents. But the assembled aliens knew better than. To judge by appearances, the third planet of the Sol system continues to provide us with endless amusement. Kethfer continued, pressing a button on his control panel. Suddenly, the hall filled with human voices, angry politicians arguing on television, people fighting over trivial matters on social media. It's in the constant noise of a species that seemed incapable of peace. Dr. Yixtel, a tall, crystalline being, from the Zephyrian delegation, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The sounds of human conflict made her feel uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. Around her, the other delegates began to laugh. "Listen to them," wheezed General Vexstar, his scaled hide turning a deeper shade of green with mirth. They still fight each other over pieces of land they could easily share. Their weapons shoot small pieces of metal. Their fastest ships can barely reach their own moon. The ethereal observer, a being of pure energy contained within a shimmering field, pulsed with what passed for laughter among its kind. They pollute their own world while dreaming of touching the stars. They wage war with explosives while we bend the very fabric of space to our will. More human transmissions played through the hall's speakers. The delegates heard human music, which they found chaotic and meaningless. They saw human art, which seemed primitive compared to their own sophisticated creations. They listened to human dreams and ambitions, dismissing them as the fantasies of a species too young to understand the real universe. "Look at this," said another delegate, pointing to a screen showing human news broadcasts. "They report on violence as if it were entertainment. They celebrate warriors instead of scholars. They make heroes out of people who fight instead of those who think." The laughter grew louder. These advanced beings, who had traveled between stars for thousands of years, found humanity's behavior both amusing and disturbing. They had watched many young species take their first steps into space, but few had seemed as chaotic as the humans. "Their communication systems are so primitive," commented a delegate from the hegemony. "They still use radio waves that travel at the speed of light. By the time their messages reach us, the conversations are already over. And their science," added another voice from the crowd. "It barely figured out how to split atoms. I think nuclear weapons are powerful, but they're nothing compared to our quantum disruptors." Dr. Yixtel raised one of her crystalline hands. "Perhaps we should consider making contact," she suggested quietly. "Every species has potential. Maybe we could guide them." The suggestion was met with immediate protests. "Guide them?" scoffed General Vexstar. "They can't even guide themselves. They have enough resources to feed everyone on their planet, but millions still go hungry. They know their industrial activities are damaging their atmosphere, but they continue anyway." "They're too violent," agreed the ethereal observer. "Their history is nothing but war after war. They've never had a single century of peace on their entire planet. How could beings like that ever fit into civilized galactic society?" The evidence seemed overwhelming. The delegates had been monitoring Earth's radio and television signals for decades, and what they saw convinced them that humanity was fundamentally flawed. The humans seemed to enjoy conflict, to seek out reasons to fight each other, and to solve problems with violence rather than wisdom. "Motion to vote," called Ambassador Kethfer. "All in favor of maintaining Earth's quarantine status?" Hands, claws, tentacles, and energy fields rose throughout the hall. The vote was unanimous. Earth would remain isolated, cut off from the galactic community until its inhabitants learned to behave like civilized beings. "Perhaps in a few thousand years they'll evolve beyond their primitive nature," suggested one delegate. When they learn to control their violent impulses, when they develop proper technology, when they can prove they're ready for contact, then we might reconsider. The assembly murmured agreement. It was a kind decision, they told themselves. By keeping humanity isolated, they were protecting both the humans and the rest of the galaxy from the chaos that would surely result from premature contact. As the meeting moved on to other business, the delegates put Earth out of their minds. It was just another primitive world full of beings who would probably destroy themselves long before they ever reached the stars. The galaxy had seen it happen before, and it would happen again. None of them noticed Dr. Yixtel's troubled expression. As she continued to stare at the image of the small blue planet, something about the human transmissions bothered her, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The other delegates saw only chaos and violence. But she sensed something else beneath the surface, something that might be far more dangerous than any of them realized. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council's decision to keep Earth in quarantine. Dr. Yixtel stood in her research laboratory on Zarian Prime, staring at the quantum communication arrays that had once buzzed. With constant human chatter, now they showed nothing but empty static. The silence had begun gradually. First, the television broadcasts had stopped. Then the radio signals faded away. Finally, even the digital communications that humans used for their primitive internet had vanished completely. Earth's electromagnetic signature had become as quiet as a dead world, still monitoring those primitives. Asked her assistant, a young Zephyrian named Kelter. His crystalline form sparkled with amusement as he reviewed the empty data screens. They've probably blown themselves up by now. Y'all knew it would happen eventually. But Yixtel frowned at the readings. In all her years of studying developing species, she had never seen a complete communication blackout like this. Even civilizations that had suffered global wars or natural disasters maintained some level of electronic activity. This silence was different. It felt deliberate. Controlled, she decided to bring her concerns to the council during their next emergency session. The Great Hall was less crowded than usual, with only the most important delegates present. The topic of discussion was supposed to be trade agreements between the core worlds. But Yixtel had requested time to speak about Earth. Honored delegates, she began, her voice echoing through the chamber. I believe we may have made an error in our assessment of the human species. The comments sparked immediate laughter from the assembled beings. Ambassador Cuthbert's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme amusement among his people. Doctor, are you suggesting that the primitive species has somehow changed in 6 months? Their complete communication silence is unprecedented, Yixtel explained, activating a holographic display that showed Earth's electromagnetic patterns over the past year. Look at these readings. The decline wasn't gradual or chaotic, as we would expect from a species destroying itself. It was systematic, organized. General Vextar's scaled hide rippled with what passed for laughter among his kind. Perhaps they finally learned to be quiet. Natural selection at work, the loud ones killed each other off, and now only the silent ones remain. The ethereal, observer pulsed with agreement. Their silence proves our assessment was correct. Primitive species always consume themselves. It's a universal law. Chaos leads to destruction. Other delegates nodded their various heads, tentacles, and energy fields. The explanation made perfect sense to them. They had watched the humans' violent broadcasts for decades, seen their wars and conflicts, witnessed their inability to cooperate even when facing global problems. Of course, they had destroyed themselves. But what if they haven't destroyed themselves? Yixtel pressed. What if they're simply not talking anymore? The suggestion was met with even more laughter. The idea that an entire species could coordinate such complete silence was absurd. The humans had shown no signs of organization beyond their small tribal groups called nations. They couldn't even agree on basic things like trade or environmental protection. Doctor, said the hegemony representative, his voice dripping with condescension, you're giving these primitives far too much credit. They were barely capable of reaching their own moon. The idea that they could coordinate planetary communications silence is ridiculous. As the weeks passed, the joke about Earth's silence became a standard part of diplomatic conversations. Delegates would reference humanity's self-destruction. Whenever they wanted to make a point about the dangers of premature species contact, the blue planet became a cautionary tale, proof that violent species inevitably consume themselves. But strange reports were beginning to filter in from the galaxy's outer regions. Ships disappearing without sending distress calls. Mining stations going dark with no explanation. Research outposts simply vanishing from contact. These incidents were scattered across the galaxy's edge, far from the important core worlds where the Council species lived. The reports were dismissed as equipment failures or pirate activity. The galaxy's edge had always been dangerous, full of asteroids, radiation storms, and the occasional bandit group. The idea that these disappearances might be connected to something larger never crossed the delegates' minds. Dr. Yixtal, however, had begun tracking these incidents. Her scientific training made her look for patterns that others might miss. She noticed that the disappearances seemed to follow a rough spiral pattern, moving inward from the galaxy's outermost regions. Each lost station or ship brought the phenomenon. Slightly closer to civilized space, she tried to present this information to the Council, but they were too busy with their regular business to pay attention. Trade disputes between the Zephyrians and the Vortok Empire were taking up most of their time. Ethereals were complaining about territorial boundaries, and the hegemony was pushing for new taxation policies. Dr. Ambassador Kethfer had said during one session, "We appreciate your dedication to research, but we have more important matters to discuss than missing pirates and equipment failures." So the galaxy's attention remained fixed on politics and trade, while the outer regions continued to go dark. The silence from Earth became just another footnote in the cosmic order. Proof that the Council's policies were correct and that primitive species were best left alone. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, something was moving through the darkness. Between stars, long-range sensors occasionally detected massive objects traveling at impossible speeds. But these readings were dismissed as sensor ghosts or cosmic debris. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were too busy congratulating themselves on their wisdom to notice the storm that was gathering in the void. The silence from Earth had become a comfortable joke. But sometimes the quietest moments come just before the loudest thunder. The emergency alarms screamed through the corridors of Hegemony Command, their piercing sound cutting through the usual calm of the military headquarters. Admiral Vexstar rushed to the main control room, his scaled feet clicking against the metal floor as he moved. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. The massive display screen showed a map of the galaxy's outer regions, dotted with red markers. Each marker represented a colony, mining station, or research outpost that had simply vanished from all contact. What had started as isolated incidents had become a terrifying pattern, Report Vexstar demanded, his voice tight with concern. His aide, a nervous Zephyrian technician named Veltar, pointed to the screen with a shaking crystalline finger. 17 more colonies have gone dark in the past week, sir. No distress calls, no weapon signatures, no signs of struggle. They're just ... gone. Vexstar studied the pattern of disappearances. They formed a rough spiral, starting from the galaxy's edge and moving steadily inward. Each lost world brought the phenomenon closer to the core worlds where the Council's member species lived. "What do the scout ships report?" he asked. "That's the strangest part, sir," Veltar replied, calling up images from recent reconnaissance. "Missions. The cities are intact. The buildings are undamaged. Power systems are still running, but there's no one there. There's no people, no bodies, nothing. It's like everyone just ... disappeared." The images on the screen showed empty streets, abandoned vehicles, and buildings with lights still on but no inhabitants. Meals sat half-eaten on tables. Children's toys lay scattered in playgrounds. Everything looked normal, except for the complete absence of life. Dr. Yixtal had been tracking these disappearances for weeks, her scientific mind trying to find patterns that the military might miss. She had requested permission to address the Council about her findings, but the other delegates were too busy with their regular political games to listen. "The trajectory is clear," she had insisted during one emergency session, her crystalline form glowing with urgency. "Whatever is causing this will reach the core worlds within months, maybe weeks." But the Council remained skeptical. The ethereal observer had pulsed with dismissive energy. Impossible. Our defensive networks would detect any threat long before it reached civilized space. These outer rim incidents are probably just equipment failures or local conflicts. The hegemony representative had agreed. Pirates have been known to attack isolated outposts. The fact that they're not leaving bodies behind simply means they're taking prisoners to sell as slaves. Even Ambassador Kethver had seemed unconcerned. The outer regions have always been dangerous. We have more important matters to discuss than missing mining stations and research posts. But the disappearances continued, each loss more significant than the last. First, it had been small asteroid mining operations with crews of 50 or fewer. Then research stations with several hundred scientists. Entire colonies with populations in the thousands were vanishing without a trace. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Whatever was responsible was moving with purpose and intelligence. This wasn't random pirate activity or equipment failure. Someone or something was systematically clearing the galaxy's edge of all life. Deep space monitoring stations began reporting strange sensor readings. Massive objects were moving through the void, appearing suddenly on scanners before vanishing just as quickly. The ships, if they were ships, didn't match any known design. In the galactic databases, Lieutenant Junho Park, manning Deep Space Station Omega-7, was the first to get clear readings on one of the mysterious objects. His hands trembled as he adjusted the long-range sensors, trying to get a better look at the contact that had just appeared on his screen. "Command, this is Omega-7, he reported, his voice barely steady. "I have a massive contact on my screens. It's huge, bigger than anything I've ever seen." The object was angular and brutal-looking, its hull reflecting starlight in ways that suggested advanced materials. It moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large, gliding through space, as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions. "Can you identify the ship class?" asked the duty officer at command. "Negative," Junho replied, watching as the object began to accelerate. "It doesn't match any known configuration. The design is completely alien to our databases." Could gather more information. The object vanished from his sensors as suddenly as it had appeared. Junho stared at his empty screen, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. Similar reports began filtering in from monitoring stations across the galaxy's edge. Massive ships appearing and disappearing like ghosts, always moving toward the inner systems. The military tried to coordinate response fleets, but the objects were too fast and too unpredictable to intercept. Dr. Yixtel compiled all the data she could gather, her scientific training helping her see connections that others missed. The disappearances weren't random, they followed a specific pattern. The mysterious ships weren't exploring or scouting, they were following a predetermined plan. The terrible truth was beginning to emerge. This wasn't some natural disaster or equipment failure. It was a campaign. Someone was systematically dismantling civilization from the outside in, working their way toward the galaxy's heart with methodical precision. The silence from Earth suddenly took on a new and frightening meaning. What if the humans hadn't destroyed themselves? What if they had simply stopped talking and started listening? What if they had been watching, learning, and preparing? As the outer regions continued to go dark, the galaxy's nightmare was only just beginning. Lieutenant Minho Lee stared at his sensor display in disbelief. The night shift at Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega-7 was usually quiet, with nothing but routine asteroid tracking and commercial shipping logs to keep him busy. But now his screens showed something that made his hands shake. "Command, this is Omega-7, he called into his communicator, his voice cracking with tension. "I have multiple contacts emerging from. I'm not sure what they're emerging from. They just appeared out of nowhere." The objects on his screen were massive, larger than any ship in the galactic databases. They moved with impossible grace through the void, their angular forms cutting through space like knives. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be heading directly toward the core worlds. "Repeat that, Omega-7, came the reply from Fleet Command. "Did you say they appeared from nowhere?" Minho checked his readings again, hoping he had made a mistake. "Confirmed, Command. No FTL signatures, no energy trails. He just materialized in space and began moving toward the inner systems. Within hours, Admiral Vexstar had assembled an emergency war council in the depths of Fleet Command. Finest military minds gathered around the tactical displays, their usual confidence replaced by growing fear. The mysterious ships were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Analysis report, Vexstar demanded, his scaled hide dark with worry. Commander? Taijin Kim, the chief tactical officer, stood before the assembled group. Sir, these vessels don't match any known technology. Their drive signatures are completely alien. They're not using conventional faster-than-light travel. It's as if they're folding space around themselves. The holographic displays showed the fleet's movements, tracked by monitoring stations across the galaxy's edge. Ships moved in perfect formation, their paths coordinated with military precision. There was no doubt that this was an invasion force. How many? Asked General Vexstar. At least 300 confirmed contacts, sir. But our sensors may not be detecting all of them. These ships seem to have some kind of stealth technology that makes them difficult to track. Dr. Yixtel stood in the corner of the room, her crystalline form dim with dread. She had been studying the disappearances for months, tracking patterns that others had dismissed as coincidence. Now, as she watched the tactical displays, the terrible truth was becoming clear. This isn't a random attack, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. Look at the pattern. Look at the timing. The room fell silent as the assembled officers turned to face her. Admiral Vexstar gestured for her to continue. The outer rim colonies didn't disappear randomly, Yixtel explained, moving to the main display. They were eliminated systematically, in a spiral pattern moving inward from the galaxy's edge. Someone has been clearing a path, removing any obstacles that might interfere with this fleet's approach. The implications were staggering. The officers exchanged glances, their faces pale with realization. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a carefully planned campaign that had been in motion for months. You're suggesting that whoever is responsible has been preparing for this attack for a long time, said Commander Kim. Not just preparing, Yixtal replied. They've been studying us, learning our weaknesses. The outer colonies weren't just eliminated, they were examined first. Someone wanted to understand how our defenses work before moving against the core worlds. Admiral Vexstar's claws clicked against the metal table. But who could have that kind of capability? We monitor all spacefaring species. No one has technology this advanced. Dr. Yixtel turned to face the assembly, her crystalline features reflecting the light from the tactical displays. What about the species we don't monitor? The ones we've dismissed as too primitive to matter? An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The officers knew exactly what she was suggesting, but the idea seemed impossible. The humans, scoffed General Vexstar.
Oh.
They can barely reach their own moon. Their weapons are chemical explosives. Their ships use primitive rocket engines. That's what we saw in their broadcasts, Yixtel countered. But what if those broadcasts were deliberately misleading? What if they wanted us to underestimate them? Commander Kim pulled up Earth's file on the main display. The planet looked peaceful and innocent, its blue oceans and white clouds giving no hint of the chaos that the Council had observed in human transmissions. The silence, whispered Dr. Yixtel. We thought they had destroyed themselves, but what? If they simply stopped broadcasting? What if they went quiet so we wouldn't know what they were really doing? The room erupted in protests.
The idea that primitive humans could have developed technology superior to the galaxy's most advanced
civilizations was absurd. But as the officers stared at the tactical displays showing the approaching fleet, absurd was becoming the new reality. Look at the ship designs, Yixtal continued, highlighting the angular vessels on the screen. They're not like anything in our databases because they were never meant to be seen. These ships were built in secret, designed for one purpose: war. Admiral Vexstar studied the fleet movements with growing horror. The precision, the coordination, the advanced technology, it all pointed to a level of military sophistication that the galaxy had never seen before. If you're right, he said slowly, then we've made the greatest mistake in galactic history. We dismissed them as primitive while they were building the most advanced war fleet ever created. The silence that followed was deafening. The galaxies. Protectors finally understood the magnitude of their error. They had laughed at humanity's chaos, never realizing that chaos was the forge that had created the most dangerous species the universe had ever known. The ships appeared over every core world simultaneously, their massive forms blotting out the stars like dark clouds of metal and death. On 12 different planets, the proud civilizations that had once mocked Earth's primitive broadcasts now stared up at the sky in terror. Admiral Daeho Kim stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, the flagship of humanity's war fleet. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the enemy ships scrambling to respond, tiny dots of light against the darkness of space. Their panic was visible even from this distance, Sir reported Communications Officer Minsu Park. His voice steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. We're receiving surrender requests from all 12 core worlds. They're begging for terms. Kim's expression remained cold as stone. 2 years of silence had led to this moment. 2 years of building, planning, and preparing, while the galaxy laughed at humanity's supposed self-destruction. Now it was time. For the truth to be revealed, open a channel, Kim ordered. All frequencies. Every species in the galaxy needs to hear this. The communication arrays activated, sending his voice across the void to every inhabited world in the galaxy. On planets where beings had never heard human speech before, Kim's words echoed through their cities and halls of power. People of the galaxy, he began, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's collective anger. You watched us for decades, studied our broadcasts, analyzed our behavior, and decided we were too primitive for your attention. You saw our conflicts and called us violent. You saw our struggles and called us chaotic. You saw our silence and assumed we had destroyed ourselves. On the bridge of the Retribution, tactical displays showed the enemy fleets trying to form defensive lines. Their movements were clumsy, panicked. These species had grown soft during centuries of peace, their military skills dulled by comfort and arrogance. But you failed to understand what you were truly observing, Kim continued. Our conflicts weren't signs of weakness, they were training. Exercises. Our chaos wasn't evidence of failure, it was adaptation. Every war we fought, every problem we solved, every challenge we overcame, made us stronger. Captain Sujin Lee, commanding the UES Vengeance, watched the Zephyrian home fleet. Through her tactical display, the crystalline beings' ships were beautiful but fragile, designed more for show than for battle. They had no idea what was about to hit them. You lived in your comfortable towers, debating politics and trade agreements. We were learning. The most important lesson in the universe. Kim's voice echoed across the stars. We learned that survival requires strength, that peace must be earned through victory, and that sometimes the only way to end a war is to win it completely. The human weapons fired for the first time, and the galaxy learned what true power looked like. Beams of concentrated energy lanced out from the human ships, striking the enemy vessels with surgical precision. The advanced shields that had protected these civilizations for millennia crumbled like paper for humanity's fury. On the planet Zarian Prime, Dr. Yixtel watched from her laboratory as the sky filled with fire. The Zephyrian defense fleet was being systematically destroyed, their beautiful crystal ships shattering like glass against the humans' brutal efficiency. She had tried to warn them, but no one had listened. Your mistake, Kim's voice continued, as the battle raged around them, was believing that primitive meant weak. You thought our technology was crude because we showed you rockets and chemical explosives. You never saw the weapons we were building in secret, the energy cannons that can crack planets, the shields that bend reality itself, the engines that fold space like paper, the Vortak Empire's mighty dreadnoughts, ships that had conquered a dozen worlds, lasted less than 10 minutes against the human assault. Their scaled crews had trained for centuries in the arts of war, but they had never faced an enemy like this, beings who had turned conflict into a science. Commander Hien Wu Choi, leading the attack on the ethereal homeworld, watched as the gaseous beings' energy-based defenses failed one by one. Target their power stations, he ordered. Disable their ability to fight back, but leave their cities intact. We're not monsters. That was the most terrifying thing about the human attack. Its restraint. These beings could have destroyed every world in the galaxy, but they chose not to. They struck only military targets, spared civilian populations, and offered surrender terms to those who gave up quickly. This wasn't random destruction, it was conquest with purpose. We spent 2 years in silence, Kim's broadcast continued. Not because we were dying, but because we were listening. We learned your languages, studied your weaknesses, and planned this moment down to the smallest detail. Every ship you see, every weapon we fire, every move we make has been calculated for maximum effect. The great cities of the core worlds began to burn as their orbital defense platforms fell one by one.
The proud species that had once dismissed.
Humanity is primitive now, knelt in the ashes of their arrogance. Finally understanding the price of their mockery, as the last enemy ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the galaxy fell silent once more. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the thunder of human engines and the weight of a new cosmic order. The species that had learned to fight in the darkness between stars had finally stepped into the light, and the universe would never be the same.